I've been developing software systems for about 25 years in a very wide range of industries. And I decided a while back, about 18 months ago, that education and learning in particular was an area that I was particularly interested in. I was shocked, I have to say, when I looked at the statistics related to learning. As you can see, we've heard today already that this is a broken system. And in fact, we've spent vast amounts of money on technology to try and help this problem. And that technology has not helped it. I summarize it by saying it's the wrong technology for the wrong problem. So the thing that motivated me to get into this environment was actually the launch of the iPad by Steve Jobs in January 2010, which in my view has changed the world entirely. This is mobile, interactive touch technology. Jobs described it as amazing, revolutionary, and profoundly disruptive, and I share that view. It's also, very interestingly, almost entirely consumer-driven, and I'd like to show you a few of the consumers. You see in the top right a 2-year-old girl who's using touch technology and manipulating letters on the screen in order to spell. Imagine that on a piece of paper. It's not possible. This is really quite remarkable. You'll see down below there, and I know most of these kids, by the way, you'll see below 2 girls, sisters, aged 9 and 4, and they're playing Angry Birds. Angry Birds was mentioned this morning. 500 million copies of this game have been downloaded, and it's a wonderful education tool. It teaches these children, gives them an innate understanding of trajectory, distance, weight, angle, speed. It is truly remarkable the speed at which they pick up the concept of trajectory, for instance. And finally, and perhaps most interestingly, you see in the top left, my father-in-law, Wiktor, who's a Polish ex-RAF flyer. He's 86-year-old, he's extremely cranky, and he hates computers. And I gave him an iPad about a month ago, and I said, just have a go. Look, there's some stuff here you like on solar system. And I happen to work with Touch Press in publishing, and I gave him a copy of the solar system. And 4 hours later, he came back to me grinning, and he said, this is truly fantastic. Now, what's interesting about this is there's a common theme. None of these people got any training. They were given the device, they picked it up, and they started to use it. And it's interesting also, in view of some of the conversations that have gone on previously, they tried and failed. They tried again, and they failed again. And finally, they tried and succeeded, and then went on to the next challenge, to the next level. There's no inhibition. There's no fear. There are no barriers. Just pick up and go. This is truly revolutionary. And I think it will change the name of the game in terms of education. So I determined that we'd have a go, and we developed with the support of Manchester Grammar School a touchpad-based, an iTouch pod system for GCSE revision. And this taught us a great deal about the manipulation of data, of operands and operators on the screen. It also taught us that, in fact, the technology was so fundamentally revolutionary that we actually had to revisit what teachers do and what students do. What do learners do? How do they consume information? Based upon that exercise, we launched a project in June of this year, July, which is to develop a complete learning course for maths up to GCSE level. And we'll deliver the first part of that in May of next year, and the final part in September of next year. To do this, I've heard a lot of talk about curriculum and curricula and so forth today. And my view, in fact, is that curriculums are inevitably changing, and therefore there will never be such a thing as a fixed curriculum. And we have to design technology that will adapt to the curriculum, not curriculums that are adapted to technology. And this is a very fundamental view in conceptual terms in relation to design. So the first thing we did, and I'll take you briefly through the journey, is we looked at the problem that I'm facing here, which is the teacher delivers content, the learner or the student consumes it, and the teacher evaluates the effectiveness of that transfer. In my case, I'm looking at blindingly bright light, and I have no idea whether you're appalled or appealing. I have no idea what your reaction is. So there's no communication between us at all. If you extend that to the teaching environment, we can say that one-to-one is very effective, and that's why private tutors are so popular, because they're very, very effective at what they do, despite the cost. We can look at one-to-few, and if there were a room of 4 or 5 people around a dinner table, that's also a very effective way of interacting. But when you get to one-to-many, you have some very serious problems. And typically, a secondary school teacher will have 25 to 40 kids in a class, and maybe 5 classes in the year, and will have to therefore interact with between 150 and 250 children. And that proves to be a virtually impossible problem, and in my view, is one of the fundamental reasons for the failure of previous systems. The feedback systems have not been effective. So I came to the conclusion that we needed to deploy very interactive alerting and monitoring capabilities. And I looked at the concept of touch and thought, well, of course, if by the manipulation of objects on the screen, we can actually deduce from that the mistakes that a pupil is making, or the good moves that he's making, or why he's taking so long, and we put that into a database, and we apply intelligent analysis to that, we can actually detect the weaknesses of the individual pupil, and we can redirect the course to suit the needs of that individual pupil. In other words, it's adaptive learning. Equally, of course, we can create a hugely interesting and powerful database that looks to the performance of an individual compared to the peers, the performance of clustered groups or whatever they may be. So that was the first piece we decided to deal with conceptually. However, the core of this is obviously the content or courseware itself. And we looked very carefully at what the issues are here. And we came to the conclusion that, firstly, we would reduce the curriculum, insofar as it exists, and we're using the universal curriculum, to the lowest possible concept level that we could get to. So this might be, for instance, we called it an element, but this might be single column addition or multiple column addition to that degree of detail. And against these, we would apply 4 processes. The first of those processes is actually an fully interactive tutorial. And this allows the student to explore the methodology and, in fact, the language of mathematics associated with the concepts that we're trying to deliver to the student. And once he's successfully demonstrated a capability in grasping, if you will, the mechanics of the problem, and if he fails to do so, by the way, we redirect him to a lower level because he's missed an underlying concept. And it's one of the great problems in education, that if you carry forward failed reasoning, the problem becomes more and more acute to the point at which it becomes fatal. So the student will be brought back if he's not proving capable or simply lacks understanding, and he'll be brought on to the next phase if he's successful, and that's practice. And practice is simply the execution, the repeated execution. And technology is very interesting. You will observe this with children in particular. Repeated execution does deliver skill. And I was interested in some of the discussions this morning. Oh, I do beg your pardon. I was getting carried away. Excuse me.
Sure.
Let me accelerate this. The practice piece is actually to hone the computational, if you will, or the skills associated with methodology. So that brings us to the third and probably most interesting piece, and that's mastery. Most examination systems that I've looked at actually they assume that because you answer the question, you understood it. But in fact, that often, not generally, but often is not the case. The mastery piece, in fact, is a sandbox. And this is a box in which the student is placed. This is obviously a logical box. Student is placed in this logical box, and it has a wall, and that wall contains the symbols associated with the methodology that he has to work with. And his first task, given a non-routine question, is actually to compile the expression that's suitable to solving this problem. And his second task is to actually execute the expression that he's created and get the right answer. If he fails to do that, he'll be brought back to another tutorial. These are very interactive processes. And he'll recycle until he's successfully gone through that phase, and then he'll go into a test phase. So we have three components. We have the content itself. And a student, by the way, will be encouraged to explore any part of the content. I've got no problem with a 9-year-old going to Key Stage 4 and playing around there, because it encourages exploration. So the three components are the content, and from that content, we abstract usage data, and we use that data in a very, very intelligent way to provide adaptive learning, and finally to provide performance analytics. Thank you.